All right. Okay, so hi everyone. So my name is Nguyen. So in this talk, I would like to talk about crystal macros. Now, in giving this talk, I would like to sincerely thank the creators of the crystal language, especially Ari Barton-Zweig, not least for his contribution to the crystal language, but also for giving his 2016 Eurodev Simple Macros, Powerful Macros talk, which serves as a foundation to the world of crystal macros as an introduction to many crystal developers, among which includes me, and is the fundamental inspiration of this talk. So for those of you who are not familiar with the crystal language, macros is a very fundamental and powerful, if not the most powerful feature of the crystal language. It behaves similarly to macros in other languages like Rust. Writing macros allows for additional code to be generated at compile time. And with macros, even with a statically typed language such as Crystal, you can pretty much do anything that's conceivable. So the reason why I'm talking about macros is because even though macros is such a fundamental and transformative feature of the language, it's actually not very well documented as compared to more basic features. For macros especially, knowledge of macros seems to be, for me at least, seems to be picked up from maintaining and upgrading applications and libraries, or it gets passed around between engineers rather than being something that's documented. And this proved to be a significant challenge for me for a long time before I became much more proficient in writing macros. Therefore, I would like to give this talk to people who kind of are in my previous position, who have not had significant experience with writing macros in whatever language. And I will be discussing useful macro patterns and idioms, and hopefully this talk will be of use to you, even if you're not a beginner in Crystal Lang, and hopefully it can be of use to you in your next macro writing session. So before I start, I would like to introduce myself a little bit, just to give a little bit of a context. So I'm a Sydney-based software engineer at PlaceOS. So Crystal Lang is my professional programming language, but it is also my first professional programming language. So that's a little bit of a different starting point from a few of the speakers here who have transitioned from Ruby predominantly, but also Perl and other languages. Therefore, my experience with Crystal has been from somewhat of, I mean, my understanding of macros, not my answer Crystal, my understanding of macros is from a rather very purely Crystal standpoint. And I think this will be evident when I give the talk, and it's reflected in I guess the age of our language. So macros is a very difficult topic, and hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate to you something of use. So I would like to showcase 8 macro patterns or idioms, which I found to be very useful and effective in my coding, which has been prevalent in some of the very famous libraries. So I am categorizing these 8 patterns into 4 different headings. Microhooks with macro included inherited, Compiletimerace, useful Toplevel macro methods, some more useful and tips, and then we'll have a Q&A session. Okay, so first we've got Microhooks. So the first pattern I would like to discuss is organizing modules with double macro included. So this is an example of a class including the clear module. So for those of you who don't know, clear is one of the most, if not one of the most advanced Postgres ORM in Crystal. And after you define your migration, this is how you, this is the next step to do with a model class if you want the model class to get access to all of the querying method. So you include clear model. So now you can do user.query.find, user.first, whatever you want. So you basically just include clear model, and then you use the macro column to declare all of the relevant fields, and so on. So with this example, if you go into clear model, so I would like to show you what's happening in the background. So this is a snippet of the clear model source code. So you can see so this module is including a bunch of other submodules. And so as an example, I will open up one of these modules. I'll open up clear model class methods to show what's inside there. And you can see that, so I'll give you a minute to just look through that. So I'll point out the interesting thing here. So we can see here that there's a double macro included. And then the next section, macro inherited, macro finished, and then the 3 macro calls, and then the macro finish, and the 3 macro calls, and then the rest of the method declaration. So we won't be talking about, we would just be talking about the double macro included. Now, how does this work? Because we know that macro hooks activate when certain patterns appear. For example, if you do macro included, and once you include a module, then the code that's inside of the macro included body will get pasted back to the including class. So what if you do 2 macro included? Well, what happens is first, the code from before will get pasted into clear model, and then it will get pasted back into class user. So essentially, all of this code will first get pasted into the clear model, and then finally it will get pasted into the original class. Okay, so the question is, before I go on to explain why we want to do this, I would give another example to demonstrate that. So this is a different submodule that's clear model also includes, and if you pay attention, it does the exact same thing. It has a double macro included right there, and it does the exact same thing. So the question is, why would you want to do this? Now, so the reason why you would want to do this, now this example is a little bit, I guess, difficult to start with regards to macro, but I guess the main advantage to using this structure is the clear separation of concerns. So you can achieve the same effect by having all of these code being written in this module, in the top level module, and then include this top level module in the class itself, and having only one macro included. That would have worked also fine. If the code is too long, we can separate it into different files, and then we can require also different files. So we can totally do that. We don't necessarily need to do macro included. But when we do macro included, so one thing you will notice is that so at the bottom, you can see that we define a self.find method. And this is actually still in the macro included block in the class methods submodule. But if you skip back to the has column submodule, with this open and close bracket method declaration, it's actually not inside of macro included. So with this structure, you can really fine grain declare and adjust where you want your method to get declared. Do you want your method to get declared directly inside of your original class, or do you want to get it declared at the top level module, or do you want to get it declared as a sub-level module? And this will be especially useful when you do like more complex hooks like method added, but in general, it just keeps the code clean. So this is a little bit unnecessarily complicated if you just want to get some stuff done, but I thought I would demonstrate this pattern in a really famous library. So the next pattern I would like to showcase is calling macros with or without inheritance with macro inherited. So this one is actually very oftenly used. So coming back to the previous example with the class method submodule, now turning our attention to this block, we'll notice that these blocks are identical. The only exception is that the top block runs inside of a macro inherited and the second block runs outside of a macro inherited. So how does this work? So if we have the original class user and we have all of those things, then, and we have no inheritance, then the second macro finish block will get run. When we run this, when we include clear model and then the rest of the operation will, we will just run the second macro finish block. And the first block won't get run. But as the moment there's any inheritance involved, so when we have a class admin that inherits from this class user, which has already included clear model, then that will also run the macro finish block. And the way it works is that it will run the macro inherited hook, and then it will run the first macro finish block. So this is really cool. You don't need to include clear model a second time. And maybe you want to do the same thing, but you want to do it a little bit differently. So if we go to the second example, which was shown before, you'll see the exact same thing. So you'll see that they repeat it here. So you declare a column constant, a hash literal, inside of macro inherited and outside of macro inherited. But here you do notice that there's something different. So if it's outside of macro inherit, so if there's no inheritance, then you define a getter. You define the getter attributes. But if it has something to do with inheritance, then you set the table. So you can so with this kind of technique, you can really allow for dry code for the same operation to be applied to the including class, but also any class that inherits from such class. So this is not in clear, this is in lucky. And as you can see, it showcases the same exact structure in which the exposure's constant gets declared with or without inheritance. And then if it's inheritance, then you run the inherit exposures macro as well to do some inheritance related stuff. So this is the pure structure of it. And this is used a lot. I also use this a lot too in PlaceOS open source libraries. All right, so the next topic, I hope I'm not going too fast. So next topic I would like to discuss is Compiletimerace. This is a little bit more accessible and a little bit more easy. It's a little bit easier to understand. All right, so the first section in Compiletimerace is, this is just a bit of an advice. Always raise compile time errors instead of runtime errors whenever possible. So this is a little bit of code I wrote a couple of months ago. It's for the OpenAPI generator module, and it's basically an adapter for an ORM. And in this case, it's an adaptive clear. So in the unless condition that you can see here, I'm basically checking to see if the class that includes this module has already included model. If it hasn't, then I'll raise an adapter error. So what's wrong with this code? When I submitted this code for a PR, I thought it was all good, but actually my senior told me that I could make this better by making it a compile time error. And I was like, oh, I knew that raise was the top level method, but I didn't know that it was also declared as a top level macro method, but in fact it was. And you can also raise a compile time error this way. And this doesn't just make it fast, it just makes everything happens at compile time. So it's absolutely awesome. So and if you go down this rabbit hole of Compiletimerace, actually I discovered that you can really fine tune a lot of stuff with Compiletimerace. For example, so currently Crystal Lang in macro methods, we don't support argument type declaration. So you can't do macro def arc and then hash literal or array literal. You can't do that. But you can use the you can use the is a question mark and then pass in the type node argument to check the ASC node type of an argument and then fine tune it that way. So this is an example from, if I'm not mistaken, Lucky. So it's basically checking if this is a irrelevant, and if it's not, then it's just rejecting it. So it's basically doing the same thing because we haven't got the capability for type checking for type restriction in micro definition argument yet. So, and then this is another interesting use case of Compiletimerace. So everyone knows that we can deprecate functions with the deprecated annotation. If you add this deprecated annotation on top of a method, you can also add it on top of a macro. Then you can still use it, but it will throw a lock in the terminal saying that, oh, this method is already deprecated, please don't use it. I found something really interesting again in the Lucky source code, where basically I haven't looked at their Git history yet, but from looking at this, I can tell that what probably happened was that after this destroy, reset, and unset methods were deprecated, they don't want to remove it immediately. They actually raise a compile time error so that people know that these methods have been updated. Instead of just simply removing it from the library and having people just go up on to the API documentation and going down the release version history and all of that just to check whether where the argument they've been using for a while is. So this is a very cool thing to do, especially for libraries that a lot of people use. Okay, so now I'll be discussing some useful top level macro methods. So this is probably most people will know already, but when I first started writing macros, I didn't know that you can just do this. So using flags and compare versions. So flag is pretty cool. This is in spec config, spec helper of Clear. So basically, flag is a macro method that allows you to pass in like a flag. So for example, in this case, it's the quiet flag. So if you pass in a quiet flag, it will set the lock level to 1. Otherwise, they'll set a lock level to debug. So this, you can achieve the same effect using a different top level macro method called env, where you can access the environment variable compile time as well. And you can really fine tune your application this way. And speaking of fine tuning application, you can also use compare versions. And this is used a lot. And if you go online, go into Crystal Lang API documentation and look at compare versions, you'll see that the example they use is actually comparison of toString. Whereas in this case, it's still toString, but it's really Crystal version constant, which I didn't know you can check, but you can really check this, and you can, so in this allowed host method, which belongs to also Lucky, you can see that depending on the version, we'll use different methods. So if this is true, then we use hostname, but otherwise we use host. So instead of doing versioning, and instead of Git pulling the correct shard version, we can do this and build version agnostic libraries that deal with every single Crystal version. So this is really cool. A couple of more useful tips that I found to be useful with regards to macros. Okay, declaring shards version in a single location. Now, everybody knows what I'm talking about when we do Crystal init lib. If we do Crystal init lib and then followed by the library name, then we'll get two files. The first, two sets of files. The first is the source code with the file name .cr and with a version hash, like this. So with a version hash of 0.1.0 string. And then we also get shard.yaml with a version field of 0.1.0. So what this means is that every single time you update your library, you have to update in two locations. and then you have to git tag it, which is so annoying. So what you can do instead is do this, which is this is in the grep library. So you can simply run shards version, and then just paste that, compile that directly, and then paste that into this version. And so you only need to declare version once inside shard, and then you can get it. Another interesting example that's a bit similar, that's used in shards in shards. So as you can see here, they basically have at the bottom, as you can see, they have a version file where it contains a single string of the version, and in their version constant, it just basically read it. And so this basically does the same thing. All right, so I think we've got one more pattern until we head to the Q&A section. So this is the last pattern that I talk about. It's actually, this is the coolest pattern because I only found out about this a couple of days ago, and previously I was struggling with this for a few months because I didn't know we could do it. So this is chemo extension. This is chemo extension in context.cr. So here you can see that they have an array literal of types stored as store mappings constant. So they have all of these types, and then in their macro finish block, they are storing this. They're splatting it inside of a union, and then they're storing it to an alias, the store types alias. And then the coolest thing is the next slide. So they have this macro method in a different file in a macro helper file, and you can basically push additional types into this constant, and then you can access this constant later on. Now, this is super cool. Like when I tried this before, I did it in a really like not very smart way, and I was using pipes, and it wasn't, and I was looping over it. I was looping over array literal, and it was not working. But this would help a lot, especially in ORMs. So one example is what I was struggling with is this is in clear again. This is clear SQL any constant alias. So basically this would this limits the type of field that you can specify, type of field type you can specify for your model fields. And it's quite fixed. The thing is that you can totally implement the same method and add additional types into this, just so that the types can convert into SQL or convert from SQL. So, and I struggled with this problem for so long, and I ended up just adding just a pipe and hash string int32 directly after here because I couldn't figure it out. But yeah, good stuff. So that's it. Thank you for listening. This is my email, and this is my Twitter and GitHub handle. Feel free to message me any questions you have if it's too long. Otherwise, that's it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been a very interesting talk. I'm definitely going to have to rewatch this one as well. I've actually never double nested a macro, so you have me with like all sorts of questions. I have kind of the first question while we're getting some things spun up, which is, can you double nest other macro hooks like inherited or anything else?
I've never done, I know that, so macro included is double, it's not just double nested. It's like you can nest it in so many levels, and then you can nest it inside macro inherited, and then you can nest it inside macro finished. So macro finished get nested inside of other macros a lot, but I don't see macro inherited gets nested. The reason why macro finished is like the most recent macro hooks, I think, that's added. And actually I really wanted to talk about macro finished because this has to do because macro finished allow you to do stuff that that only runs after everything else is run, after all the constants, everything else is declared, and you can do verbatim. So you can write macro that write macros. And yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, the macros are one of the more difficult parts of Crystal. I feel like both the documentation and guides have just not been up to the other level of the standard library. So it's very interesting because like a lot of it for me has been discovery, but I believe a lot of it for other people has been what they've discovered or is in other code bases. So what can be stored in constants at macro time?
What can be stored in the constant? You can store, so you can store anything you want, really. You can store a string, you can store a hash, you can store an array, you can store integer, you can store numbers, you can store pretty much anything. And what you can also do is you can load the constant into a variable, and then you can manipulate the variable if the constant is too long. And then if it's in a hash, then you can also add additional key value pairs to it. If it's an array, you can add additional stuff to it. There's a clear method that can be used on hash, literal, and yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been a really fascinating talk. I'm not sure if I have any other questions for you because I'm still like processing it all.